Senator Stivers, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk with me about this past year, the Derby, a lot of things going on in the state. So let's at least start by talking about the session. We've had a couple of months to at least digest some of the takeaways from that, a robust session where we had income tax cut and a few other things happen. So what are you pleased with? What do you think is still left on the table?
Well, you have to be pleased from my perspective and people of my philosophical perspective is that House Bill 1, which has to, by Constitution, start in the House, that we passed it immediately, which reduced or will reduce the state income tax next year by another 0.5%. If we'd have done only that, we'd have had a good session, in my opinion. I'm going to talk about Senate Bill 1. I think that creates a lot of new economic opportunity, both in the film and TV industry, but I think it will also be a big asset to this state for tourism. And I used, and for people of my age, they always remember Rocky running up the steps in Philadelphia. And people go to places like that after they've been made somewhat iconic by a TV series or a movie. It could be Cheers in the bar where everybody knows your name. But I think those two, because of where they were and what they will do for people's pocketbooks and economics and job opportunity, are naturally significant in and of themselves and made the session very good.
We had a bill, I can't remember the number, I want to say 770 in that range.
775?
Yeah. Takeaway from that bill is the goal still to have a tax cut go to zero, and does that bill affect the timeline to get there?
Yeah, there were things in that, and so we know that it's been a lot easier where we were fiscally to take 0.5% cuts, but we know as we go further, it may not be as easy to hit those triggers. We're going to make sure we don't wind up getting into the red, but we may take smaller incremental steps, so going to 0.25% or 0.1% when we can. And so that was in 775, I think, but I know it was one of our bills. But that's where we want to try to maybe move and continue to move our tax code towards the zero, but may have to do it in smaller increments.
Is there any clarity to you yet on what kind of timeline we'd be looking at? What with that, are we looking at 2030, 5, 10 years?
Somewhere after the 2030 area, and so much is dependent on the economy. You don't know when something unforeseen will happen, but if everything were to stay static, we're probably looking at the early 2030s. But then you have an unforeseen event like COVID that totally changed business models and tax receipts. 9/11 did that 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. But things like that happen that change. And so if we stay static and don't have that unforeseen event, the early 2030s, we should be getting really close to getting to zero income tax.
Now that we're about to start the interim here in about a month or so, is there any early emerging issues that you all may discuss? I know that we're going into a budget year, so since we're about a year into that budget, this may be part of the answer to that question, some early issues that may be part of the budget.
Yeah, and this is not a criticism of the administration because things happen. We haven't really gotten a good look at what this year is doing because there was a computer glitch at the end of February that we didn't get all receipts counted. And that's just something that happens. That's in no way a reflection on the administration. And then another unforeseen event, they haven't been able to get us all the March numbers in the month of April, which they report the next month because of the floods. So we're a little bit behind, but once we see those, we'll really start looking at, to answer your question, the budget. How have we performed with our receipts and then our expenditures? So that's the ultimate policy document, but we're a little bit delayed and it's nobody's fault. But that will be the thing we will look at most in the interim.
Well, where I imagine there may be some criticism towards the executive branch is on a letter that was sent to y'all, I think, in late March from the governor on the funding available to implement certain bills. There was I want to say about a dozen or so bills
Right,
that
right.
was listed there. Is there any update on that situation, that back and forth?
Well, we have told the governor's office, a few years ago we passed some legislation that saved several millions of dollars, around the area of 65, 70 million. And he went out and spent that immediately on expanding certain procedures in the dental area. And when he wants to expand a program, you'll see him go out and do a press conference and say, oh, we're going to expand this program, or we found money to do this. There's money in this budget to do those bills. It's just not in the areas that he really wants to do them. And so we know how the process works. We know there's always going to be lapsed dollars, what they call one-time dollars, that he could go get and fund these programs like kinship care, which he says there's not the money to do that. We totally disagree with him.
And that was around Senate Bill 151, which was from the 20...
Julie Rocky
Yeah.
Adams's bill from the prior session, but that's become the most significant bill that people have recognized. And if there is a real need, it is in that area for kinship care.
Well, I point out it's from the last session because this isn't the first time that we've seen, a letter like this be delivered to the legislature. In terms of political strategy, what do you make of this, tactic that is being taken by the executive branch on not implementing these bills? Because we saw this last year with 151, and we're seeing this again this year.
Well, let's take 151, and the reason I used those dollars is because they about coincide in time. Not quite the same, but they come close to coinciding in time. So we come to this year where he says there are various things out there that he will not fund. And I ask people to go back, and they see us on TV, or they hear the sound bite from a press conference. But if you really want to see why we believe what we believe, listen to some of the committee hearings, and when they came back with these estimates on, oh, here's the cost estimate. When you get in front of our A&R chairs, our budget chairs, our committees, and say, well, how did you come up with this number? It is really a stretch when they tell us, oh, this is how we came up with this number. We look at it, we talk to various people in the administration and the private sector that deal with this, and they say, those are totally wrong. So that's twofold. One, they find money when they want to find money for programs they want to do, but when they come back with these estimates saying they can't do it, they're pretty thin on their knowledge and their predictions. And so from that perspective, he talks about how everybody should follow the law when he criticizes President Trump, but then he doesn't want to follow the laws that we send to him. So it's not, to me, a good political strategy. It's an inconsistent one at best.
And we'll see how that sort of plays out as we go into the next session. Turning back to just looking at other issues we may have going on, how much more are we going to be hearing about energy?
A lot. Most people know that I've been intricately involved in the energy issues. You heard some discussion here. Most people know that I have been intricately involved in the data centers, artificial intelligence, hyperscaling. I know the governor and them are recruiting substantial people based on some of the incentives we opened up this year that are not only available to the Jefferson County area, but are available throughout the state, depending on the size and the spend. And I'm very well aware of what they're doing. And he may have the potential of having some big announcements in the next few months, or if not around the first of the year. But it's going to be dependent on us being able to take care of the natural organic growth for the residential and the current commercial users of energy, but also investment into being able to deal with all these new things that are coming online. Even if you want to talk about electric cars, electric vehicles, to AI and all the things related to batteries. It's going to basically double our need for energy generation, and then dispatchable and reliable. So our economy is not going to be able to exist in the developing kind of cutting edge way unless we come with a substantial increase in our ability to generate energy. So over the past few years, that's where you've seen, and really it's been more led in the Senate, to talk about solar, to talk about gas, to talk about coal, but to also talk about nuclear, and how we've put a lot of money in there for the Center for Applied Energy Research to really help us with those individuals that have that expertise to be on the cutting edge of generation and dispatchability of reliable energy.
How long does it feasibly take to expand something like that? I know we have our existing sort of coal industry, but what about the time it may take to sort of diversify?
Well, it will take longer to diversify, but this was the significance of what, how long to expand. Well, you got different sectors. If it's totally new, like nuclear, it's going to take 10 or 15 years to get there. If you're talking about recreating some things where you've had some coal-fired plants or gas plants, can be up and running much quicker. They just need to refurbish them. And that was significant about what President Trump, they invited me to the White House to be there for the EO signing. That could be very fast. That could be within a year to get a lot of this back up and running that had basically been mothballed. In between some of the renewables will be difficult to do to the capacity or level to keep up with the demand. There's just not big enough. It's not reliable enough. If you think about solar only produces about 6 to 7 hours a day, because when the sun sets, there's no generation off of that. So, and you can read the articles. If you don't have a windy day, you're not going to have good generation from the windmills. If you don't have a good sunny day, and the sun generally only lasts for 6 hours. So nuclear and diversification and expansion depends kind of on what section you're in. But we could do some things immediately in the fossil fuel area. And if you did a gas plant, you could probably have a new gas plant up maybe in 2 years.
So what's going to be the thing, or what's going to be it that makes Kentucky ultimately, marketable for putting data centers and things of that nature?
2 things, 3 things. Let's say 3 things. 1, energy. Energy is a key. Low cost energy. And accessible, reliable, dispatchable energy. That's all one subject matter. And we have the ability to do it because of our mineral rich status. Don't know that the administration wants to go there. This current administration, they seem to be more in tune with staying away from fossil fuels. But then the other is our tax code. We talked about it earlier. When you look at that, the tax code, it makes it look better for people to come here and locate. Then the incentives, which I have basically been the drafter of the incentives that create the sales tax incentives. And then probably one other thing, the natural resource of water. Water is integral in artificial intelligence, the generation, in conjunction with the generation to be able to cool these hyperscaler machines, these AI machines. So we have a lot of it right here. Probably one of the better situated states for it, being on the cutting edge of the delivery of artificial intelligence data centers, hyperscaling.
So I want to transition a little bit to some national subjects, and I know you've gotten plenty of questions about tariffs.
Yeah.
A lot of local politicians have, just getting their thoughts and things like that. I want to ask more specifically, how long is too long to continue in the current sort of economic situation we're in before it becomes an issue that's just tougher to defend for, local and state politicians on the ground level?
I haven't defended it. I haven't advocated for it because there's a couple things, and we talked about this earlier. We haven't seen the impacts either positively or negatively because we haven't seen our monthly receipts for a couple of months. Again, not in any way blaming anybody. We can't help the fact that there was a flood here and that shut down state government for basically a week. But until we see those, and see what type of trends we are seeing in sales tax, different things like, and we all understand bourbon could have been an impact, what's going to happen with the automobile industry. It's hard to tell whether we're at a point that it is hurting too much or not until we see data. Now, as to its impact, this is a national issue. We don't have the ability to set tariffs. In fact, this is some 200 plus years ago why the Constitution was written the way it was, because states don't have tariff power, only the national government. But with that, the president, and I'm cautious, very, very supportive of what he has done at the border, looking at energy sources. He just entered a really nice executive order for historic black colleges and universities. There's a lot of positive things, and you're going to agree on. It's kind of a wait and see for most of us to see if he gets the desired result from using tariffs as a tool. So I'm not going to criticize. I'm not going to get on the bandwagon supporting him, because it's a different perspective, and that's not one that a lot of locals will have the technical expertise to understand. Kind of a rare instance, Senator McConnell and Senator Paul are both on the same side of this issue, saying it could be harmful. They're the better people to ask that, because they see the worldwide, national type of scenarios versus us at the state level. But right now, it's a little bit too early for me to prognosticate it whether it's good or bad.
When you say wait and see, I just want to take it back to my original question. How long is too long before wait and see becomes a...
Okay, let's start. I'll give you. Let's say we start getting data in that our sales tax receipts are down, that we're losing jobs, therefore the income tax is down. So when you see sales tax receipts and income tax receipts going down, you're probably going to see corporate income tax go down. When you start seeing those trends, then you'll say, wait a minute, we've got to change something here. But if they don't, let's say they stay strong. Let's say, based upon the consensus forecast group that gives us those numbers we budget to, that they stay at or exceed those numbers, then people who are saying tariffs are detrimental, well, we're not seeing it in the data. So that's why I say seeing the data is critical. But we just haven't been, and again, I want to make it clear, I'll criticize the governor's office when I think they're wrong, but this is nobody's fault. It's just the reality of what happened with a computer glitch and weather that we've not been able to see the last 45-day receipts.
So sort of staying on national, but kind of bringing it back local, we got a Senate race next year. I believe your name was at least floated as somebody who could be interested in joining that race.
True.
Is
That's
that
true.
Something you've had any additional thoughts about?
Yeah, I have. I actually went to D.C. for the signing of the executive order on the coal and energy issues. And as I went there, I thought, this is really a nice place to visit, but not some place I want to spend 40 weeks a year, 4 and 5 days a week doing. Appreciate my friends up there, Brett Guthrie and Congressman Rogers and the group that goes back and forth like that all the time. They devote a lot of time. That's tough. But that's not something I want to do. After I saw that, I thought, no, this doesn't interest me.
As far as the candidates that have joined, curious your thoughts on the race and factors that may ultimately decide the primary next year.
Which primary?
Well, there'll be a Democrat. Well, there'll be a GOP primary that we know of. There could be a Democrat primary if we get a couple more folks in.
Well, on the Democrat primary, whoever gets into it, I know Pam Stevenson, fine lady, have a great relationship with her. She just has a little bit farther left-leaning, where I'm a little bit farther right-leaning disposition. But she's very conversant, very true. You don't have to figure out if she's playing a game with you. If she says something, that's where she is. But her philosophy is definitely left-leaning. Whoever gets into it on that side is probably going to have to go way left to get a nomination, and then whether they can come back to the center for the fall becomes kind of interesting to see how that plays out. Of the people who are in the Republican side now, and there may be more that jump into it, you got a good bunch of candidates. when you start talking about the former Attorney General and the current Congressman, they're quality people, nice people, and both of them are right-leaning candidates. And then then you have to come back whether it's just between Daniel and Andy Barr, Daniel Cameron and Andy Barr, whether Nate Morris jumps in, Scott Jennings jumps in, somebody else jumps in. Wait and see. But all of them are, all of them, and I'll even say this about Pam, all of them are good people. They're solid people. They just have differing beliefs, just like probably you and your parents had some different beliefs, or you and your children have different beliefs. But that's what people are going to look at, their beliefs. And I think it's going to be hard for a Democrat to win the race, because if you think about this state, the first question I ask whoever would be my Democrat opponent, are you going to go up there and support AOC and Chuck Schumer and that group? How do they avoid that question? Because they can't work in that society and that setup unless they do. But those people aren't philosophically aligned with the state of Kentucky. And so that's why I think a Republican will eventually win the United States Senate race.
If you had to give any advice to those candidates, what would you say?
Which one? On the Republican side?
Probably for your Republican colleagues.
Say nothing bad about your Republican opponents. Be positive. Give a vision for the future. That's what people want to see. They want to know about energy. They want to know about jobs. They want to know about their kids going to school. They want to know about retirements and education. Come with a vision. That's what people want to hear. No need to go negative. Come with a vision. And then the first thing out of the bat when you get into the general, pose that question to them. Again, not saying anybody's good or bad, but it's just a different set of beliefs and values. And I think when that question is asked to the Republican nominee, or from the Republican nominee to the Democrat nominee, it'll become clear, are you supporting AOC and Chuck Schumer or whomever, or are you going to be more philosophically aligned with the current leadership in the Republican Party, John Thune and others? And they can't avoid that question. And it's a simple question, and that's one that defines each person. So that's what I would tell them to do.
I'll ask this last question before I move on to some more lighter topics, but given Congressman Barr's entry into the race, it also sets up another race for the 6th district. Democrats think they got a shot in that race. Your general thoughts on just how competitive that race may end up being?
It can be competitive, but I know the voting trends and patterns because we draw the congressional districts, not the congressional delegation. When we redrew those, and the courts have upheld them as constitutional, we got sued over them. They sued over the House map, the congressional map, but not the Senate map. But the courts upheld the two that they were sued over. But when we redrew that district, the House Democrats wanted to split and take the Wilmore area out of that congressional district and kind of make it look odd. But we put the Wilmore area back in, and when you look at data, you don't look at registration. You look at performance. And in performance on congressional or federal races, that's what we call a +9 Republican district. So taking everything even, a Republican's going to generally win by 9 points. Does that mean, everything's even? No, it's not. That's one of the closer districts. The rest of the districts, except for the Jefferson County districts, are even higher than that. But that gets down into single digits, and that's something that if you take too much of a far leap left, you're out of it. If you take too much of a far leap right, you can allow the Democrat opponent a window of opportunity.
We'll see what happens next November.
Think about this. This is basically May of 2025, and people are talking about a November 2026 race. That's amazing that politics just amazes me that people are thinking that way. That's a lot different than it was 25 years ago.
So now I want to talk about a more fun subject, the Derby. We got that coming up
Oh,
this
yeah.
weekend. This will be airing the morning after the Derby. There's a lot of different questions I could ask about it.
I'm opposed to journalism. Oh, wait a minute, that's the horse.
The horse.
Yeah, that's the horse. Okay. Yeah, we're talking about a horse.
Well, maybe to keep it at least sort of like in the political
Maybe you'll use that
column
one.
for a second.
I'm opposed
there.
to journalism.
I wouldn't play dirty with you like that.
That would be fun, actually. Okay.
What kind of political opportunities do we get out of having the Derby here? You know, we have the national, international spotlight on us, and certainly, you know, we've been talking about all these different economic opportunities throughout this interview. How does the Derby sort of play into helping make those things happen?
It's huge. It's our best day of the state of Kentucky. Just without a doubt, in my perspective, it's the best day for this. Well, let me change that. It's probably the best week the state has, because there's 500,000 people who come in here for the Derby week, come to Louisville. They go out and visit the bourbon trails. They do other things. Got a good friend in Louisville, talks about how the hotel, motel, restaurant industry just really booms during this time. So it's good from an economic standpoint, but also the image, you know, that is projected by all the news media, that it's going all over the United States, all over the world. When you travel, people will talk about Kentucky Fried Chicken and horses and bourbon. Except for the fried chicken, the horses and bourbon are really exposed in a very positive way over this week. And that brings in tax dollars, that brings in future opportunities. It sells this state. So I know that I'm certain that the governor has people coming in, that he's courting selling the state. Secretary Noel is doing the same thing over at Economic Development. Tourism Cabinet is doing that. Mayor of Louisville, Mayor Greenberg is bringing people in. Businesses themselves on their own are bringing people in. They're having parties and connection types of events. So it is the day, the week for Kentucky. And that's what the Derby does for us.
What does it mean to you? I mean, as a prominent politician in Kentucky for you know, decent part of your life, I mean, you get I guess a more personal interaction with the Derby than some other folks get. Maybe have been to a few more than other folks may be able to get to.
I've been to a lot.
What does it mean to you? What is
There's the sense of pride, but also I don't want to underestimate the fact of what the small group or the 10 or 15 group of people that get together at their house to watch the Derby, to have the Derby party. It's a day. It's a day all over. I can remember growing up, my dad, my relatives, a lot of them would go to the Derby, but if they didn't go to the Derby, they had a Derby party. And that was in Manchester and London, Kentucky, those two towns. And so there's that sense of pride, but it is not just a Louisville day, a horse day, it's a Kentucky day. And I remember my times at the Derby, but as distinctly, I can remember my times at home with my cousins, aunts, uncles, and parents and friends watching it on TV. And so journalism, we'd have journalism on a little strip of paper and all the other horses, and you draw and put $5 in the pot, and whoever's won, you won the pot. You know, those are the types of things that happen, and that's why it creates that sense of pride, because it is such a positive exposure, but it creates a lot of memories.
Is that the general tradition that you may have, a little gathering with family? Is there any favorite Derby traditions you may have?
Well, I think that's common among a lot of people, not just my family. When we were talking about Rome, Georgia, you know, when my sisters have been away from here, they would talk about having Derby parties in Georgia or California or Iowa, wherever they were, because people were interested in it. And in other states, they were having Derby parties. And I will bet you every dollar in my pocket, there's a bunch of Derby parties going on in Florida this weekend. So many Kentuckians down there. But that's just, yeah, those are all the positive things that come back even recently during my political career, but even as I was growing up, remember those days taking place.
Well, that was all the questions I had for you, Senator Stivers. So I appreciate you indulging me with a bit more fun questions there on the Derby, and as always, appreciate your time, sir.
Well, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Who are you picking?
Probably publisher.
Okay.
I like to pick a long shot, and because I went out to every
Publisher and
stud,
journalism.
well, I have to. I get a good chuckle out of the names. I think there was one year there was a horse called Bodacious that ran that I had to put some money on.
You know what I think is kind of, I think of sports a lot because I played growing up. My son was one of my sons was a pretty good track person. He finished 6th in the state in the 400 and all that. So I've watched sports all my life. Played on some state championship teams. Played on a state championship team. And the thing about it, if you look back 20 years ago and see what the 400-meter world record was, or in swimming, or anything like that, everybody's always gotten faster. Records always been broken, except in one sport. That's horse racing. Nobody's ever beat Secretariat, and that's almost 50 years ago. That's amazing. That's the greatest horse, in my opinion, that's lived. And it's not an opinion. It's substantiated by empirical data. He ran the fastest Derby, and nobody has beaten it in 50 years. Close, I think.
Yeah.
So you think about that from just a perspective. You have to say that may be if you consider horses athletes, one of the greatest athletes of all time. Is that horse that has never been challenged for his record at the Derby.
I think biomechanically considered
Yeah.
the most perfect horse.
I don't know if that was it or not, but you think today, and you think about all the specialized training people do today, the twitch muscles. When my son talked about this, the twitch muscles and all that, and all you had to do for speed versus longevity and style and form, and if you're going to throw a football, you need to use these muscles. If you're catching it, use these muscles. You know, all the different things, and they work on that. And they have all that specific types of workouts that you do. And that's why I think you see every year, you know, sprinters and shot putters and high jumpers, they always get better than the year before. But you've never seen that in horse racing.
It's impressive.
It is.
Well, Senator Stivers,
All right.
thank you so much for your time today, sir.
Glad to.